What's up, YouTube? This video gonna be about Verdine White and his musical influences. You know, Verdine White is the bass player for Earth, Wind, and Fire, Maurice White's brother, and a distinctive bass player. But what was his musical influences? Because to be a bass player for one of the greatest progressive bands ever, also Verdine White's underrated as a producer and as a songwriter because he definitely has some credentials and credits. Um, he mentions Louis Stafford as a bassist. He mentions Paul McCartney. He was a big fan of McCartney's sound and vibe with the Beatles records. He talked about that. Obviously, he gonna mention James Jamerson and Ron Carter. So let me address those guys. James Jamerson is arguably the godfather of the bass. All those classic Motown records. His distinctive tone, his distinctive phrasing. You can't get away around it. You know, for here I heard it through the grapevine or what's going on. Stories of how Jameson would sit and play bass just sitting on his back and just come up with those rhythms and those intricacies was amazing. So that was not a surprise with that. Ron Carter with the stand-up bass. Do you know Ron Carter is the most sampled and most used bassist in music? And he played on so many classic records. His stand-up bass had a distinctive sound, a distinctive snap, and you could definitely tell where it was at. Of course, Verdine White mentioned gospel music. You can't go on with saying that, obviously. He mentions Miles Davis and John Coltrane. So Miles's music was definitely geared towards a certain style, a certain feel that you would hear. Um, he mentioned the Ramsey Lewis records because his brother Maurice played with Ramsey Lewis band on drums. So he mentions the impact that those records had on his own stylings. John Coltrane's distinctive tones. A lot of musicians, vocalists, especially from that particular era, and they were into jazz and the styles and the tones, mentioned Miles and Coltrane. They had a very harmonious tone. As an instrumentalist, you couldn't help but feel it and get involved in it. He mentions those Beatles records. He mentioned the Motown records. You could definitely hear that. The obvious one is Larry Graham from Graham Central, from before Graham Central Station was Sly and the Family Stone. You had to have gone to school on Sly and the Family Stone because that was the musical standard of listening to the groove and picking out your pocket and with your rhythm and your counters. So I know that that was a huge influence with what he was putting down. But Verdine White is considered one of the best bassists ever, I would say. Had a distinctive melodic tone, a certain pocket, and he was a centerpiece of the elements in their peak and their prime. Because you can't talk about Earth, Wind, and Fire if you're going to have your dream era